I get the magic call from Enzo Ferrari. And then my first race, I was so damn nervous, as you can imagine. I was awake all night. And suddenly my car went sideways. But it was the beginning of a wonderful era. He said, Derek, you've got to do it. You know, you could win Le Mans in that car. And we won the race in 75. Porsche really sort of controlled you, kept you under lock and key the whole time. All the things we did, it was just wonderful to be part of that team. I mean, I was the luckiest guy in the world.
We're going to start right at the beginning of your career in motorsport. How did you get into motorsport?
Very briefly, I followed racing from the early days. I lived 5-6 miles away due south of here, and I lived on a farm. And aged 9, I drove tractors and jeeps and anything that had a motor in it. I wasn't terribly keen on digging potatoes, but I was really good at driving around in a tractor. And Goodwood I could hear in the background, and if I was out hoeing sugar beet on the farm, we had 600 acres there. And if I was out doing that, I could hear the cars going around Goodwood. In those days, there were no sound restrictions, and Formula Ones would be testing here. It was wonderful. And I sort of knew which corner the car was at. I could tell by the gear shift where the car was. But how I knew that, I don't know, but I remember it very vividly. I think eventually I was here in 1962 when Sterling had his accident, and I was marshalling at Madgwick, and he had his crash further across at Fordwater. And as I said, he was my hero, and that sort of put the damper on things when it appeared he was not well and he was never going to race again. When I was old enough, I mean, the first thing I did, get my driving license to drive on the road. And then I applied to the Jim Russell Racing Driver School, which really was the only school in the country. And so I went to Snetterton, which is 100 and long way here, way north. And I went there probably half a dozen times. I didn't quite finish the course. And then eventually Jim Russell picked me out one day and he said, who was driving that car there? And I said, I was. I'd only ever heard him giving somebody a rollicking for behaving badly. So I said I was, and he took me to one side and in front of the other drivers, and he just said, basically, he said, I guarantee by the end of the year, you're in a factory team. I went, whoa, my dad will be pleased to hear that. So anyway, it was unbelievable. He said, I can't teach you anymore. And I mean, I can't believe that, but that's what he said. So it meant that I had to go out myself and sort myself out. And so I did. And I think within a couple of years, during that following couple of years, a friend of mine called John Penfold, who lives just down the road here, he came along to sell some farm machinery to us. And we got chatting about where we'd been. He had done overland to Australia, but was technically really brilliant and an engineer, pretty good driver too. And so we said, let's build a car together. So we built a Lotus 7. And we got a Cortina engine from the Ford dealer in Chichester and put some bits and pieces in it, camshaft, I think, and something like that, and built it in our workshops at the farm, and then finished it off in his place. And that's how I started. And then, of course, I came here for my first race.
How did that first race go?
Well, I'd never been over the other side. So I knew what the first two corners, because I used to marshal in there, and then, of course, I had the thrill of sitting in somebody's car as a passenger, being driven back to the paddock to go home. So I did go around the other corners. But no, I had done a couple of laps in something, I think. I can't remember what, but I knew where I was going. The only problem was we didn't finish the car till 2 a.m. because John had insisted that I took it out for a drive. And it was piddling with rain. And of course, it was open cockpit. He didn't even have mudguards, fenders on the car at that point, at midnight. And he said, you're going to have to take it for a run to run this engine in. And I said, well, how far? He said, well, you better give it a good run. Well, I tell you, I was bloody cold. It was March the 12th, 1964. Blinding with rain. I was the only one on the road. I drove from here to Midhurst. And I got there and I was soaked and I was cold. I couldn't see where I was going. And I thought, I'm going home. So I turned around and drove back to the farm. I think to his house, his workshops. And I thought, he said, I'm going to come in at 5 a.m. and finish assembling the car, putting the mudguards on. And that's how it's done. And then he drove it to the track. So at least I could get in it dry. And I got in it and went out. And of course, believe it or not, Sterling Moss racing team, smart, he actually had a car in it, a B8 Brabham, which was the sports car of the era. I mean, magic, with a brilliant driver called Hugh Dibley, who was an airline pilot. I mean, I remember all this rubbish. I'm not sure why, and it was a special moment in my life, I suppose. And we went out and did practice. It was a handicap race, so they saw the times I was doing, which were possibly dismal, but I was in the middle of the pack, so you go off 5-second intervals and that sort of thing. And I remember it. I mean, got in the car and was sitting there, and the flag dropped and off I went. And I acted. The truth is, I never actually overtook anybody, but they were there because I saw them spinning. The guys were in the bank here, spinning off there, spinning there. It was so wet. And I kept going round. It was only 5 laps. And I came around and came out the chicane, and John put the board out. We didn't even have a pit board, but he borrowed one. And he put the board out, and it says L1, meaning lap 1, and then P1. I mean, and just roared with laughter. I thought, no way I should be leading this race. I haven't seen anybody, but they're all off the road. And and Hugh Dibley as well. He'd actually pulled out of the race because it was too dangerous. I learned later. So anyway, so it was the last lap, and I went round laughing all the way and came round and got the checkered flag.
And it was a very quick rise. You had a quick jump to Formula 3. What was the background behind that?
Well, like everything, it doesn't work in racing to do anything by the cheap. I mean, the Lotus 7 was cheap, but for us it was a fortune. And it got, as I ended up with 300 quid each at the end of it and a couple of alarm clocks. And then the next year we had to go to Formula 3. Formula 3, an engine cost £600, a Cosworth engine. But there were some great teams out there. Some guys that got on and went places within British motorsport. And I mean, some super drivers, John Cardwell, for example, and there was Piers Courage, who went on into Formula 1. I mean, just a lot of fabulous drivers. And of course, in what we call works teams. And I was this little tugger coming up from Pagham, and I wasn't going into any works team. So we bought our own little chassis from a hill climb guy. Said, well, we're not going to buy a Cosworth engine, it's £600. So we will have to build our own. Well, that was the biggest mistake ever. So we thought we can build a car to take on Ford basically. So we built it around the same engine, but hopeless, and it kept blowing up. Time and time again, it blew up. So I was gaining an amazing amount of experience, but we didn't do many races, only 8. That was all. And then lo and behold, let's go. Where do we go now? The only way is up to Formula 2. Basically, we bought a Brabham, which was £2,500 for the chassis. We bought 2 Cosworth engines, £2,500 each. So we're up to £7,500 of our budget for that year. And then we buy a transit van and a trailer. And that's what we went off with our BT23C, I think that's what it was called. And that was the start of me in Formula 2. And it's terrible, I can't quite remember. I think I went and raced in Europe somewhere, and the clutch failed. We only had one mechanic, remember, dear old George Brown from Sidlesham. We had a clutch problem there, as I say, and then after that, the next race was Thruxton, a local bit, which had taken the place of Goodwood. The one thing I was so upset about was when our current Duke's grandfather said, we're going to stop having big races at Goodwood. And it was such a pity because I really wanted to race at my home track in a race car and sort of being local boy does good. So, and here I'm sitting here in a shed now, I'm talking about it, but that was the beginning. And then we started racing all over Europe. And but after 5 races, I get the magic call from Enzo Ferrari saying, come and have a test drive at Monza. So I went and drove a sister or brother of that car, might have even been that car. And there were about 12, 14 of us there. And I don't know, I got the drive at the end of whatever time it was, no idea my lap times. And then the next day I went to the factory, and that's when I met Enzo. And it was just a phenomenal meeting and an experience to meet him. And then my first race was the Lotteria, which is a big race with about 45, 50 cars in at Monza. And I was on pole there for some reason. In the race, I was running 4th or 5th because this little car was only a 1600 engine, but it was beautiful handling through all the curves. I mean, you always look at it and say it looks good, but it didn't have any torque. And the guys in the Ford engines, the Cosworths, they just came out of the corners quicker every time. They just had that mid-range torque. And I was in this group, about 16 of us, tearing through the Parabolica 2 abreast, and suddenly my car went sideways. Never to this day would admit it was my fault, but somebody said they saw a footage, and I was hit by somebody behind me, which could have been because we were very close. So when 7 or 8 cars crashed, 3 of them were these cars, all crashed, but not terribly badly damaged. And that was me out of the race, and that was my start. So Ferrari gave me my 250 quid start money and said, off you go. And that was it.
Let's talk about Ferrari. It's obviously a major period in your life, not just your career.
Anyone's life, let me tell you. Yeah.
Enzo Ferrari is an enigma, I guess. You only know him if you met him. What was he like?
Well, I think I told you how I met him, that day in the workshop. But I mean, we went out to lunch that day in his little hotel across the road, and he questioned me. And of course, I didn't speak Italian really, and he didn't speak English, so we had to speak French, and I wasn't very good at French. And of course, if somebody doesn't want to talk to you, they won't speak the language that help you. So we had a very interesting lunch, and he asked me. I remember him vividly asking me about Jochen Rindt. How good is Jochen Rindt? Should we hire Jochen Rindt? And I'm going, oh, absolutely, I would. But this is like just before I went off to sort of do my first race in single-seater Formula One. And but I used to get calls from his office, and they'd say, tonight, they'd say, Herr Bell, tonight you have dinner with El Commendatore. And I go, God, I didn't really want to go out with the old man tonight. I was going to have dinner with some people and some girls, and we're going to have a laugh, because you didn't have many laughs in Modena. So that was it. And so the old man would come round in his 2+2, and he'd pull up outside the rail finny, and they would say, Mr. Bell, Mr. Ferrari's here. Actually, I was waiting. They said 6:15, so he'd pick me up, and he was sitting in there, without his jacket on, his braces on, and off the road we go in his car, and we'd go out to dinner somewhere. It was remarkable. I mean, I did it numerous times, and I was just so lucky in that short space of time to do it, that sort of thing with him. But I never forget it. One day we went into this restaurant. As we got there, we both got out of the car. As we walked up to the restaurant door, he went in front of me and opened the door to let me in. I mean, things like that. And you hear these stories about him, but I never had that experience. I guess at a certain point later on, very briefly, of course, or very quickly into the program, I realized that I didn't have a very good car, and the engines weren't good enough. And eventually, of course, is when they began that second season, the middle of it, they said, okay, we're pulling out of racing because we're not competitive. So
you were quick in basically everything. You were successful, you were winning races. If you weren't winning, you were fast. At that stage, did you understand what was happening? Were you thinking of how good you could be? No, I hadn't got a clue. Do you know, it's very strange. Only when you reflect on it and think, actually, I didn't do badly. But I mean, over the years, I was just not good enough. I was never good enough. And I was fortunate, I was fortunate. I mean, without putting in what era, to start with, I had to contend with people like Jim Clark. And tragically, I was in that very first race that I ever did in Formula 2 in Germany. And I drove to the track with Jimmy in the morning with Graham Hill, and Jimmy died in the race. So that was a pretty horrific start at my second race in Formula 2. And that, I guess, it stuns you and brings you back to earth that the greatest driver in the world died that morning. And yet I'd been with him the evening before and then drove to the track with him. And that shook me a lot. So you keep on checking yourself. But all I will say is there was always somebody that was better than me. What was it like? You mentioned Jim Clark. You raced in an era that was less than safe. Did you think about it at the time? What was it like driving through that era? Well, everybody was doing the same thing. I mean, you can see it there. There ain't much in the side. If somebody hits you, you're part of the fire, aren't you? I mean, if you can imagine, you got in the Formula One Ferrari, which is a much extreme example of that. Literally, you sat in a fuel tank, which was covered in vinyl or whatever. You had tanks down either side of your leg, which had another 10 gallons in either side.
And then you had actually for the long distance Formula One races, which were a little bit longer, you had a lap tank. You had a tank between the steering wheel behind the dashboard, and that, I mean, it was unbelievable. And you sat in this bomb. So no wonder when people had accidents, they died. But it was a terribly difficult time. And now today, I'm not saying aren't they lucky? They are lucky to have such safe cars. But still, miracles can happen. You can die.
And Enzo obviously gave you your chance in Formula One at Monza, no less, for Ferrari.
Yeah.
That must have been quite the cauldron to step into.
Yes, it was. We were talking just now about sort of, you know, the atmosphere and the planes going overhead and that sort of thing. And we stayed at the Santa Storagio Hotel. Enzo put all his drivers up there. And I mean, and then my first race, I was so damn nervous, as you can imagine. I was awake all night. It was just ridiculous. But that was my first sort of race, and it was just remarkable to have that experience so soon. And it was at Monza. I qualified, I think 7th, it might have been 8th, and I was on the 3rd row with Graham Hill and Australian drivers sitting in the other car. These days, if you'd been 8th quickest, they would have been talking about you forever. But in those days, you're just one of the crew. And I mean, in those days, there were 32 cars on the grid. It was amazing. So I was being a bit careful. I didn't really want to go flying off. And then the engine suddenly blew up, going into the Lesmos. And I cruised. I remember pulling over to the side where it was fairly safe. And I went to find a gap through the fence, which has got this wire around it everywhere. And I found I got to get through this gap on the first, actually, in the middle of the first Lesmo, and I was standing there watching the cars go. I thought, well, that's at least, you know, I can tell my kids Dad got to Formula One and did his first Grand Prix at Monza in a Ferrari. And then the leading group come through, and there was Richie Ginther and so on, and John Surtees going through with Chris Haim on 3rd. And somebody puked some oil out, and Chris flew off the road and went backwards right in front of me into the guardrail and disappeared through the trees like that. And I went, oh, God. You know, I'd had a gutful that year because Jimmy had died in the first race, international race, and there's my teammate at Ferrari dying. And I thought, well, at least I can tell my kids, Dad quit, but he was on the 3rd row of the grid. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, couldn't get across the track to get to him because there were cars flying. I mean, there was no debris on the track because he had taken it with him when he went over the rail. And then next thing is I see this figure come up, and he's brushing all the bloody grass and straw off him. And it's Chris. And I went, thank God for that. He's all right. And that was it. And the car panicked. When I saw it go, he hit the guardrail backwards, and he went up in the air like that, and that was it. And I went, oh, well, he's going to land upside down. But it was further down than I thought. He landed on its wheels. But I did have a wonderful, time going up to that with the Tasman series in that very car, because that engine then was 2.4 litres, and you could, do what you did to it to make it a 2.4 litre engine. And of course, it had a lot of power, and it was very nimble.
Fantastic. And then from there, I guess the move into sports cars became obviously a huge move. Yeah. When did you first drive a sports car?
I think in 1970, would that be right? Yeah. And I had a call, would I drive the Ferrari at Le Mans, the 512S. So no, it was actually at Spa for Jack Swatters, the Belgian importers. I went and drove, and I met him during my time at Ferrari. So I went and drove at Spa and did quite well. But the car, every time I came for a fuel stop, it used to catch a light, which was always a bit off-putting. So eventually they broke the windows to get me out, and that sort of thing, because the door handle didn't work anymore, that sort of thing. But it was a great experience. And I believe I finished the race with a slightly, literally I had, my eyebrows were burnt because it was an open face helmet, and it was, I had a scorched bit around here. And after that, Mr. Ferrari said to Jack Swatters, I want Derek Bell in my team for Le Mans. And Jack was a bit upset because he was going to Le Mans but wanted me in the car. So I remember I flew to Brussels to see Jack, and I said, I had a bad experience at the end of it all with just him pulled out of racing. Why should I go back and race for him? And Jack said, you've got to race for Mr. Ferrari, because if you don't, he said, I won't get any spare parts for my car. Oh, great, isn't it? So I went, and then, of course, drove for Enzo or we had 4 cars or 3 512Ss, which is an amazing car. It was a great experience. But I guess what came out of that is that there were no team orders. There was nothing like, okay, take it steady, guys, keep out of trouble for the first 6 hours, all the stuff that you used to read about. It was like hell for leather and go for it.
And you raced for, the list of manufacturers, Porsche, Ferrari, Renault, huge manufacturers. And yet your first win at Le Mans was with a Mirage.
Which was nothing like that.
Exactly. How does that even come about?
Well, it was John Wyer, because he, as I might have mentioned, John, he ran the Aston Martin team back in the late 60s. He then ran the GT40s and then with Gulf sponsorship, and he was the man he was Mr. Le Mans really, as far as engineering experience and that sort of thing, and always his track record was remarkable. And of course, he'd had Jackie Ickx racing for him with the GT40s. So he said to me, we're going to run a Cosworth engine at Le Mans. So he went to see Keith Duckworth at Cosworth and said, Keith, we're going to go to Le Mans with a new car, lightweight, a sports car. And he said, we're going to use the Cosworth engine, which was built for 2 hours, let me tell you. So he says, what would you do, Keith? He said, I wouldn't go, lad, if I was you. So that was it. John walked out like, oh, okay. The head of Cosworth says don't do it. Anyway, they did, and they detuned the engine. And of course, you wouldn't necessarily appreciate it, but the Mulsanne Straight's 6 kilometers long, and it was dead straight then. Well, it still is, but they put these lousy chicanes in. But it was dead straight all the way down with the kink before you get towards the end. And of course, the Cosworth engine would never withstand that sustained high revs. It could never run at 10,000 revs. It would blow up because it was built for 2 hours, not for 24. And so he said, he eventually was working with Keith, and we somehow got to detune it so that the maximum revs isn't at 10, it's at like 8.5, because there was a vibration that would come in at 8.8, which would blow the engine up. So they had to detune everything to run at 8.5 on Mulsanne Straight. And it seemed dead slow, but we were still doing probably 150 miles an hour. And that's how we went with that car. And we tested it here, we tested it everywhere imaginable before we went. And then I remember I drove with, bless his heart, with Mike Hellwood. I was a great fan of his. And for some reason he decided he wanted to do bikes and he wanted to do car racing. So he joined our team. And he drove actually in the GT40 era for John. And there he was, my teammate, at a couple, the whole season. Yeah, like I'll think of the year, which year it was in a minute, 73, 74, 74. But we went to Spa, we won the Spa 6 hour, 1,000 kilometers, went to Watkins Glen, I don't know if it was a night, but we won with this car, or one of these cars, 2-car team. We won, Vern Schuppen was driving one. And we did so many races around the world at that point, basically with this car, and it did very well. But it was a Formula One engine, so it would do a Formula One distance race very well. We didn't run the Le Mans long distance engine there, but we did go to Le Mans the first year with Mike and I. We go to Le Mans, and we knew it wasn't going to last, and in fact we did last. We lasted the whole 25. I don't know where we finished, but we did finish. But it gave them a lot of confidence to go back the next year. And I stayed, and Jackie Ickx contacted John Wyer. I saw the letter he wrote, and he said, I'd like to drive in your team at Le Mans. Jackie was always so clever. He knew exactly when to approach teams. And John was thrilled to have him back because he'd had him in the GT40. So he said, okay. He said, you'll drive with Derek Bell. And that was it. So we went to Le Mans together. And it was an amazing experience. But of course, there's no way we could win. All we could do is drag this poor old car back. It had things broken on it all over the place, and we staggered home, and we won the race, of course, in 75.
Talk about joining teams at the right time. You went back to Porsche in 1980, which turned out to be quite a good decision.
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely. I remember I thought, what am I going to drive at Le Mans this year in 1980? I mean, there was not much out there because it was a change of the rules to the new rules coming in '71 with the these new Group C cars, as it was called. And I remember, I don't know where I was, and somebody said to me, I've heard that Porsche are short of a driver. They've got 3 drivers for 2 cars, and they need another one. So I phoned up Manfred Janka. I forgot where I was when I heard about it. Can you imagine this? So I phoned up Manfred Janka, the team manager, and said, hey, Manfred, I was driving for somebody else, for Steve O'Rourke, that's right, bless his heart, in a GT car. And so I phoned up Manfred Janka and said, yesterday I heard that you're still short of a driver. Would you consider me? And he said, Derek, you are free? And I said, well, I'm not sure about that. I said, I'm on an agreement, or I've agreed to drive for Steve O'Rourke. And he said, Derek, he said, that would be wonderful. I said, well, I'm not sure I can do it. He said, no, you must come. He said, you, and I thought, well, I'd be in the second car along with Jochen and Vernschuh, whoever it was, but not with Jackie Ickx. He said, you will drive with Jackie Ickx. Now I have the 2 best sports car drivers in the world. And I went, bloody hell, this is pretty special. And so I then had to speak to Steve O'Rourke, and I went up to London to his office, a lovely guy, because in those days you scratched at every drive you could get, and he liked me driving for him, and I loved driving with him. And he said, Derek, you've got to do it. You could win Le Mans in that car. So we did, and that was it, really.
And it was 2 in a row, so 81,
2 in a
82.
row, yes, that's right. Yes.
That's where the wheels really started to turn in your career.
Well, 82, of course, was the 956, again, with Jackie Ickx. And by then, I guess people were thinking, we'd won in 75, and I think people think, well, these two are quite a good pair together. Couldn't tell you why. We always drove a magnificent car, and we didn't abuse it. And we were quite quick, I guess.
Porsche Group C, that's kind of a big deal in motorsport history. You were part of that. How big a deal was it at that time?
Well, we were sort of talking about it just now with, the 936, the Jules car, and the next year was to be Group C. And of course, none of us knew we were going to drive for Porsche, but it did me a lot of favors, sort of driving the 936 and winning and then being off. So they obviously thought, well, we need Ickx in the team, perhaps we should have Bell as well. So I went with them all to Porsche for the first number of races, and it was Jackie and I in the 956 in the first race at Silverstone. And we knew we couldn't win, and it was the most astonishing one of the astonishing sort of things that came out into the open. We went to Silverstone. We're thrashing around and lapping in 1:15, which is almost a Formula One time, because it had tremendous grip. First time any of us had driven ground effect. And we're lapping in 1:15 around Silverstone. And suddenly, on the morning of the race, Peter Falk, the team manager, came up to Jackie and I, and he said, we're not going to win today. We went, well, how can we? We're like seconds quicker than anybody else. And he said, you're just not going to win. We said, why? Because we've got the fuel calculations wrong. We worked the fuel calculations out for this race based on the Le Mans fuel regulations, which are inevitably always something changed to make it awkward. So we had to drive around, like instead of doing 1:15s, we were doing 1:23 to try and keep within the fuel limits for that race. It was diabolical, but it was a beginning of a wonderful era. And then, of course, the 962 came in, and that improved it again. And it was ground effects, and the engines developed. And it was, for me, it was the greatest era of my life because I was so much part of the development of the car along with the other drivers. And the car was so good. And to work with a team like Porsche from the scratch when they got the fuel consumption wrong, to going to having better aerodynamics under the car, better aerodynamics over the tar and different wheels and all the things we did. It was just wonderful to be part of that team. I mean, I was the luckiest guy in the world.
Driving a 956, 962, arguably the greatest racing cars of all time.
Yes, I think, I never thought about it. I mean, certainly sports cars, yes. But what an era. And I think having Porsche's name behind it helped a lot. But their engineering and the way they did things was to get the best out of everything. And, they picked good drivers. We weren't necessarily the quickest, but they had, like my dear teammate Stefan Beloff, dynamically quick, but of course didn't last very long. And that was a very sad part of my life, to have a teammate like that who dies. But, Porsche really sort of controlled you, kept you under lock and key the whole time, and they never told you how to drive, but you knew it wasn't a good idea to blow up, because if you blew it up, you were out.
And you ended up with 5 Le Mans wins, which puts you joint 3rd on the all-time list. Yeah. How proud are you of that stat?
Oh, I was just lucky to be there, wasn't I? Of course I'm proud, but to drive for Porsche for so long, having experienced a race for Ferrari and sports cars before that, and drive with the magnificent drivers I was with, and with the team the way it was rocking and rolling. And don't forget, I was racing in America during that latter period, and I think overall I won 41 races. So in that car, whether it be the Lowenbrau Porsche, which was damn nearly identical to the European car, and I was backwards and forwards each week. I'd fly in America, race in America one day, and I won Daytona 3 times in the Lowenbrau car. But with great drivers. I drove all the time with Al Holbert in the Lowenbrau car, who came back and raced with me and Hans Stuck in 86 and 87, when we had 3 drivers. And then before that, Al and I had won Daytona in 86 and 80. Nobody's ever won 2 American 24-hour races and the 2 European races, but Al Holbert and I. And so it was just an amazing era, wasn't it? I was lucky to be there.
We'll talk about your longevity, because you raced well into the 90s. I think what says it best is that you actually raced alongside your son, which must have been quite a special moment in your life.
Well, that was the most memorable race of my life, because of, to finish at whatever, 3rd, although we were leading for about 12 hours, I think 10 hours or something, all through the night. Anybody could have won it. And we might have won it, because I was in the lead when we had the problem, and Leto was 27 seconds behind in the morning. We had this problem suddenly with the transmission that we knew might happen, without going into the nitty-gritty of that and throwing rocks at people. And unfortunately, of course, we went out or dropped to 3rd place, and we staggered home sort of almost without any gearbox. But the gearbox wasn't damaged. It was all the clutch stuff. And but to drive with your son was special, and of course the stories are endless. I remember, he got in the car at sort of 3 or 4 in the morning, and he just looked at me, and I remember forgetting, he's looking up at me, and I'm about to shut the door, and I looked at him, and I think I can tell him there's a lot of water at Mulsanne, there's a lot of water here, there's that, and watch out for a parked car there, and that sort of thing. And I go, I can't tell him, it's too much. And I slammed the door down on him, and he looked at me like, oh, thanks, Dad, and drove off. And I went, oh my God, that my son might never come back. It really crossed my mind. He could die out there in that stuff. Because when you first go out in that atrocious conditions, you go out there, and the conditions are different to what they were an hour before, or maybe half an hour before. 40 minutes later, he was in. By that time, I'd gone into the motorhome, and I'd changed, and because I'd done quite a long stint at that point. And then they come in and knock on the side of the door, and they say, Mr. Bell, you're back in again. I said, what do you mean back in again? I just got out. He said, Justin just spun. He said, he's coming in the pits, because he spooked himself, and he's absolutely destroyed, because he went where he didn't know. And he said, well, if it does that, I'm going to get killed. So he came in, and of course I said, well, get Andy Wallace, bless him. He's in there, because I'd only just got out. So they said, oh, Andy can't do anymore, he's exhausted. I went, well, bloody great. I'm 55 years old, and they're in their 30s. So I get out of bed and jump in my driver's suit, and out we go. And Justin comes in, and his eyes are like, oh my goodness, what did he see? These big poached eggs. So anyway, I jump in the car, and off I go. And we had a battle through the night, and it was a heck of a race, actually. And then in the morning, I got in again, and I remember thinking, it's daylight now, and I remember thinking, oh, the whole world's going to see this old fart driving around, and J.J. Leto's the young Formula One star, and his teammates coming up and blasting by me. And so they put the board out. It takes 2 laps, or they can give you a lap time. and they put plus 27 seconds. And then the next lap, they put the board out, and the next lap, I'm starting to go, and I was obviously going quite well. And then I handed the car over, and I had pulled out 2 seconds in 10 laps and that was it. It wasn't the end of the race, but I handed the car over, and then I think Andy got in, and we finished third because this component that we could have used but weren't about to spend the money on it let us down. And of course, the factory car with JJ Leto in, didn't have the problem. So that was it. But that was still a great day to stand up there on the winner's rostrum with my son. Didn't matter where we were.
When did you decide to retire?
I don't know. I don't think I've said I've retired yet, but no, I have. Yes, I don't
There's
think
still
so.
a chance.
I mean, I wouldn't go back. There's no way, because I'm that much older now. I know. I was thinking this morning, actually, as I picked up my racing gear and walked out to bring it here just in case somebody offered me a drive. But as I walked out, I suddenly thought, what would Jackie say to me? And I knew that Ickx and Mr. Stewart, or so Jackie Stewart, would say, what the hell are you doing, Derek? What have you got to prove? And my wife says that, what have you got to prove? And it's right. And I've never tried to prove anything. I just wanted to enjoy my racing. So I guess if I did it, it would be because I wanted to enjoy it, not because I was trying to prove that at 80-something I could still drive quickly. But I was here last year driving a quite a useful sports car around all day, giving people runs in a charity event. And I was flat out, and it was... at the end, I never thought about it. And I got back home, I was lying in bed at 3 a.m, and I went, do you realize how you drove today? You never thought about it. I got in it and just drove it. I drove it as if it was 40 years ago, because I know the limits. I know the track. I don't know the limits, but I knew the track. I was in a car I didn't know the limits of, but I very soon found them. And I mean, I remember one of the gentlemen got out that I took round. It was a charity racing event, big one. We do it again this year. And I remember him getting out and say, a young guy, he was in his 20s, he said, bloody hell, you blokes are crazy. Because I was on the limit, but I wasn't sort of broadside out of the corners. I was balancing it all the way through. It's all a gentle touch. And I guess that's what's helped me all these years.
And all of that is being celebrated at the Festival of Speed this year. We're gonna commemorate your career, your life, with a parade of cars.
Fantastic.
The place where it all started.
Well, it's amazing. I didn't forget. I mean, when the Duke wrote this letter to me back earlier in the year, I remember reading it and going, what? Because he had done a great celebration 8, 9, 10 years ago, when he had the cars that I had driven, and I drove them up the hill. People loaned them from all over the world, and that was wonderful. And I thought, well, that was more than I deserved, or as much as I deserved, if you like, to do anything more. How can you do more? So when he wrote to me, I went, oh my goodness. I really wanted to think to myself that maybe I haven't got anything else to put on. But I thought, that is amazing. And I showed it to my wife, Misty, and she said, oh my goodness, that's amazing, Derek, And of course then, so the calls come and all the kids are saying, Dad, we want to come to see you drive these cars, or some of them if I can. But no, it's beyond my dreams when I think back to 1964, to think that, I've gone from driving a little shitty old Lotus 7, here I am sitting in Tyrrell Shed at the corner of Goodwood, still here, and being asked to drive these beautiful cars.
And long may it continue.
Thank you very much.
Wow, just wow.
You can get close to the drivers, you can get close to the cars, you can really feel like you're involved in the action.
It's a fun fair, but with cars.